In 1502, a young diplomat traveled to the court of Cesare Borgia, carrying something he believed would protect him: preparation. He had spent weeks constructing his argument. He had studied the political terrain. He had rehearsed every possible counter to every possible objection. He arrived believing that the man across the table would engage with his logic, respond to his reasoning, and ultimately yield to the quality of his case. He was wrong about almost everything. Borgia received him without urgency. He listened without expression. He offered nothing, conceded nothing, and revealed nothing. And the diplomat, trained, intelligent, ambitious, found himself doing something he had not planned. He started talking faster. He started filling the silences that Borgia made no effort to fill. He started offering things that hadn't been requested. By the time the meeting ended, he had given away more than he arrived intending to negotiate, and the man across from him had barely moved. That diplomat recorded what he experienced. He wrote about it with the precision of someone who understood they had just witnessed something that his existing framework for power could not explain. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, and the understanding he built from that encounter would shape everything he wrote afterward. What Borgia possessed in that room was not superior argument. It was not greater status. It was not even strategy in the conventional sense. It was something internal, a quality of presence that operated below the level of language and logic, that rearranged the dynamics of the interaction before a single word was exchanged. This video is about that quality, what it is, where it comes from, how it works, and why most people spend their lives doing the precise opposite of it, without realizing the cost. There are 5 mechanisms at work in the psychology of genuinely magnetic power. The first 4 are principles that can be understood and practiced. The 5th is the foundation that makes all of them real, rather than performed. Without the 5th, the first 4 are costume. With it, they become character. The first mechanism concerns the fundamental law that governs every human interaction, and which almost everyone violates constantly. The person who wants less controls more. Not the person with the most resources, not the person with the most eloquent argument, not even the person with the highest status, the person who can sit across from what they want and genuinely remain unattached to whether they get it. That person bends the gravity of the interaction toward themselves without visible effort. Robert Cialdini documented the psychological mechanics of this through decades of research on influence. He found that perceived scarcity increases perceived value in ways that bypass rational evaluation entirely. The brain does not experience rare things as merely different from abundant things. It experiences them as fundamentally more valuable, more desirable, more worth pursuing. But Cialdini's insight about scarcity applies most powerfully not to objects, but to people. Your attention, your emotional availability, your presence, your approval. These follow the same psychological law. When you make yourself freely available, when you pursue more than you are pursued, when you answer instantly and always, when you over-explain your value in the hope that the explanation will create the appreciation the presence has not, you are flooding the market with yourself. You are communicating abundance at precisely the moment when scarcity would serve you. And abundance, by the law you cannot argue with, produces diminished value. The courts of Renaissance Italy understood this intuitively. The advisors who survived were not the most talented ones. They were the ones who understood proximity as a currency that inflates when it is rationed and deflates when it is given without limit. The courtier who was always present at every feast, every council, every minor occasion, who volunteered before being asked, who agreed before disagreement could occur, became invisible not through absence but through overexposure. He had made himself background. Meanwhile, the advisor who appeared only when summoned, who spoke only when the room had exhausted its other options, who left before anyone wanted him to leave, That man occupied a permanently significant position in the mind of the prince, not because of superior talent, but because his presence felt like an event rather than a default. Mark Manson has written about what he calls non-neediness as the foundational trait of all genuine social power. His argument is that confidence can be performed and charisma can be imitated, but the authentic absence of desperation cannot be sustained as theater. It either exists as a genuine internal condition or it doesn't. And people, at a level below their conscious awareness, can read the difference. The person whose value is internally sourced radiates a frequency that the person who is performing composure cannot replicate for long. The performance has seams. The reality doesn't. The question this first mechanism leaves you with is uncomfortable and worth sitting with. What are you currently chasing that is moving away from you in direct proportion to the energy you direct toward it? Where is the pursuit itself the problem? Because the law is consistent, stop reaching and watch what reaches back. The second mechanism is one that Machiavelli observed Borgia use with a precision that was almost architectural. Power lives not in what you reveal, but in the gap between what people know and what they suspect they don't. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency of the human mind to fixate on incomplete information far more persistently than on information that has been resolved. An open loop in the mind does not rest quietly. It returns, uninvited, occupying attention and generating interest that completed information never produces. Mystery is not merely attractive, it is cognitively compulsive. The brain cannot file what it cannot categorize, and what it cannot file it continues to process. Borgia understood this not as a psychological theory, but as a practical principle. He never revealed his complete plan to anyone, not his generals, not his father, not his most trusted counsel. He distributed pieces of his thinking strategically, enough for each person to act on their portion, never enough for anyone to see the whole architecture, and the effect of this was profound. Every person in his court existed in a state of permanent partial understanding, always close to comprehending him, never quite arriving. That gap was not a failure of communication. It was the engine of his authority. Most people operate on the opposite principle. They narrate. They over-explain. They share their plans while still in formation, their feelings before they are resolved, their reasoning before they are even certain of the conclusion. They believe that transparency generates trust, and in some relational contexts, it does. But in the dynamics of power and attraction, full transparency is the elimination of the one quality that makes a person worth continued attention. When someone can be fully read, they can be fully categorized, and fully categorized things lose their pull. Robert Greene makes this argument in direct terms. Mystery is not the same as dishonesty. The distinction is important. Mystery is editorial. It is the deliberate discipline of deciding what to reveal, when to reveal it, and what to allow to remain unspoken. It is not fabrication. It is curation. The artist who shows you 9/10 of the painting and keeps the final portion hidden does not lie to you. They simply ensure that your attention does not move on. The practical adjustment is smaller than most people expect. When someone asks what you have been working on, do not deliver the full account. Offer the texture without the map. Something that has been consuming my attention lately. I'll tell you more when it's further along. That sentence does more for your positioning than a 10-minute explanation. It communicates depth. It creates investment. It gives the other person a reason to return. You are not concealing. You are building interest through incompletion. And incompletion, as Zeigarnik demonstrated, is what the mind cannot leave alone. The third mechanism is one that Epictetus, a man born into slavery with no material power whatsoever, demonstrated more completely than any prince of his era. The posture of self-sufficiency is more commanding than the posture of any status. Epictetus had no wealth, no title, no political leverage of any kind, and yet the most powerful men in Rome sought his guidance. The reason was not the content of his philosophy, though the content was remarkable. The reason was what his presence communicated before he said anything. He did not want from them. He did not need their validation, their patronage, or their approval. He was not positioning himself relative to their status. He was simply present, entirely self-contained, and that self-containment created a gravity that wealth and title could not. Because wealth can be matched, and title can be granted or removed, but a person who genuinely does not need your validation, that person possesses something you cannot take from them by any means available to you. Machiavelli observed the same principle operating in the princes who endured versus those who fell. The rulers who begged for alliances, who sent concessions before they were requested, who allowed desperation to shape their diplomacy. They were the first to be manipulated, and eventually the first to be removed, not because their position was weakest, but because they had broadcast the most critical information a rival needs. I cannot survive without your cooperation. That information, once transmitted, becomes the lever through which you are controlled. The prince who communicated indifference to outcomes, who made himself appear as the opportunity rather than the supplicant, held courts that operated on an entirely different dynamic. People oriented around him, not because they were commanded to, but because his self-sufficiency created a magnetic field that pulled people toward it instinctively. The internal shift required here is not the performance of not caring. It is the genuine restructuring of how you hold what you want. You do not need the outcome. You prefer it. You are not evaluating whether they will choose you. You are evaluating whether they deserve access to you. The difference in these framings is not semantic. It produces an entirely different energetic quality in the body, in the voice, in the eyes. And people read that quality at a level far below conscious processing. The fourth mechanism is perhaps the most counterintuitive of the first four. Making yourself too easy to access is not generosity. It is the elimination of the condition that makes access feel valuable. In 1959, Elliot Aronson and Judson Mills conducted a study that has implications far beyond its original context. They tested whether the difficulty of gaining entry to a group affected how much members valued it. The answer was clear and significant. People who underwent difficult, effortful, even uncomfortable processes to join a group valued that group measurably more than people who joined easily, even when the group itself was identical in both cases. The effort created the valuation, not the quality of what was being entered, but the cost of the entry. This principle operates in every domain of human experience with remarkable consistency. The relationship that required patience and genuine courtship is valued differently than the one that was immediately available. The opportunity that required demonstrated commitment before access was granted is treated differently than the one that required nothing. Not because the underlying thing is different, but because the path to it encoded a different level of worth. When you make yourself completely available, when your answer is always yes, when your time rearranges to accommodate whoever requests it, when your presence costs nothing, you remove the friction that creates value. Not because you are playing a game, but because the psychology of human valuation genuinely requires some measure of cost to register worth. Things that cost nothing are treated as though they are worth nothing, not through calculation, but through the automatic operation of a principle that runs deeper than deliberate thought. The adjustment is not to become difficult for its own sake. It is to develop genuine standards for how your time and attention are allocated, and then to honor those standards, even when it creates discomfort for someone who expected easier access. When your time genuinely costs something, when your yes means something because your no is real. The dynamic of every interaction you enter shifts. You are no longer the one pursuing. You become the one people orient around. Now the fifth mechanism, the one I mentioned at the beginning, the one that determines whether everything else is sustainable or whether it collapses the first time it is genuinely tested. Borgia did not construct his presence through technique. He did not arrive at that meeting with Machiavelli, having rehearsed a strategy of silence. He sat in that room, doing what was natural to a man who had already resolved, at the deepest level of his identity, that he did not require the diplomat's approval. The silence was not performed. It was the natural posture of a self that was not leaking. And this is where most people fail when they encounter frameworks like the first four mechanisms. They understand them intellectually. They attempt to apply them. And they find that the application keeps collapsing, that the manufactured scarcity gets overridden by a surge of anxiety, that the deliberate mystery breaks down when the need to be understood becomes overwhelming, that the posture of self-sufficiency holds for a day before the underlying insecurity reasserts itself. The techniques are sound. The foundation is not there to hold them. The foundation is this: the end of self-betrayal. Not the dramatic self-betrayals, the obvious moments when you violated something you held clearly. The quiet, habitual ones. The times you said yes when the entire interior of you was saying no, and you said yes because the cost of the no felt too high. The times you stayed in a room, a relationship, a dynamic that was slowly narrowing you, because leaving required a confrontation with uncertainty that felt worse than the slow erosion of staying. The times you modified your honest position to avoid the discomfort of someone else's disapproval. The times you laughed at the thing that diminished you. The times you performed enthusiasm you did not feel, because genuine indifference seemed socially dangerous. Each of these moments was a small transaction. You exchanged a piece of internal integrity for a moment of external ease. And the accumulated cost of those transactions is not merely emotional. It is structural. It produces a deep, quiet, often unconscious knowledge that you cannot fully trust yourself. That when a moment of genuine cost arrives, you have a history of choosing comfort over your own standards. And that knowledge, unspoken, leaks. It radiates in exactly the frequency that every mechanism this video has described requires you to eliminate. You can practice scarcity with all the discipline you possess, but if underneath that practice there is a quiet certainty that you are not actually worth the wait, the body will betray you. The pause will become fidgeting. The mystery will become anxiety. The posture will hold until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the collapse will be more damaging than if you had never attempted the posture. The work that makes everything else real is the audit of self-betrayal. Not self-flagellation, not a catalogue of failures to be rehearsed with guilt. A clear-eyed accounting of the patterns. Where do you consistently abandon your own standards to keep someone else comfortable? What are the recurring contexts in which your stated values and your actual behavior diverge? What do you know, have known for a long time, that you keep choosing not to act on, because the action would cost you something you are not yet willing to lose? Those questions are not comfortable. They are also the only path to the internal condition that produces genuine magnetic presence. Because the person who has confronted those patterns, who has looked at the history of self-abandonment and made a different decision, even once, even in a small thing, begins to rebuild something. A quiet internal knowledge that when the moment of cost arrives, they can be trusted to honor their own ground. And that knowledge, accumulating over decisions and days, produces the quality that Machiavelli recognized in Borgia across a diplomatic table, and spent the rest of his intellectual life trying to describe. It is not charisma. It is not confidence in the conventional sense. It is coherence. the condition in which what a person appears to be and what they actually are have become the same thing. When the performance has ended, not because it was abandoned, but because it was no longer necessary. When there is nothing to maintain because there is no gap between the interior and the exterior to manage. That coherence is what changes the room when you walk in. Not louder, not more forceful, different in a way that people feel before they can articulate it. There is something about this person, something settled, something that does not seem to require anything from me. And because it requires nothing, it pulls everything. This is the fifth mechanism. And it is the only one that does not require practice in the way the others do. Because it is not a behavior. It is a condition. You arrive at it not through rehearsal, but through the cumulative effect of decisions to stop betraying yourself, to stop performing a version of yourself calibrated for someone else's comfort, and to begin inhabiting the version that was always underneath the performance, waiting. That version already exists in you. You have encountered him in fragments, in the moments when you said no and meant it, and the world did not end. In the moments when you walked away from something that was comfortable and wrong, and felt the quality of the air change as you move. In the moments of genuine stillness, when you stopped negotiating with your own boundaries and felt, briefly, what sufficiency actually feels like. He is not someone you need to construct. He is someone you need to stop concealing. The question worth sitting with tonight is not about someone else. It is not about a strategy or a technique or a framework. It is the most direct question that Machiavelli was really asking when he wrote down what he observed in that room with Borgia. What are you still performing? And who are you performing it for?